Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gabesty here. This is the Heroic DPS guide for Thok the Bloodthirsty. And in this video, DPS players should get the basics that they'll need to know to get through this fight on Heroic difficulty. So let's get started. To begin, let's talk about positioning overall. And this is important, of course, just to know the basics of where you need to stand during both phases of the fight. So for the normal phases, where you're just attacking the boss, he's doing his screeches and all that good stuff. If you're assuming, I'm assuming you're using the same setup we are here. And so you'll have two general markers at the corners of the inner circle. So there you can see a blue and a green marker. For this method, we have our melee DPS up to 4 players stacked up on the green marker on the right, so kind of toward the back of the boss. And then the ranged players, up to 4 of them again, on the blue marker on the left. With 10 players, you have 4 on each of those. Your 1 tank up front, and then your extra player in the back. So this allows you to never have 5 people stacked up on one marker, because your tank always goes to their designated marker as one of the 4 players, the off tank at the time. So you can force the transition of the phase when you want it to occur, but keep everyone close enough together to get efficient heals and all that stuff. Generally speaking, these positions work great. The front group toward the front of the boss, where I am, at blue, is never really in danger of getting breathed on because of the angle of the boss. The back group for melee sometimes has to watch out for the tail swipe depending on the angle. But if it hits you, just move slightly back or slightly to your left a couple steps and that'll be fine. And then this position is mirrored on the right if you're on the right cage. So the purple and the red markers there you saw briefly. The melee would be in the back one again at purple, and the range would be up front on the red. And you just have your assigned group. Wherever you go, you just repeat it every time. It's very simple. For the final cage in the back, there isn't enough raid markers to actually designate 2 spots. So the way we have it set up is a yellow marker in the back you'll see every once in a while. That's for the ranged group of 4. And then the melee group is just directly in front of them, about 10 or 12 yards. So rather than doing side to side on the boss for the final red cage, you do front and back. And this allows you to move right when the fire spawns underneath your group. Everyone just rotates right a little bit. So those are the basic positions for the normal phases. Now for the kiting phases that you see occurring here, this video is going to be much too short to really go into the kiting positions and paths in too much detail. So I've created a fully animated top-down guide that deals with all the kiting stuff for the full raid guide. So I would highly suggest if you want to see that, figure out how that works, just click on the annotation, the yellow one on the bottom left there, go to that video, and then in the description, click on the kiting in positions animated annotation. I think it's around 14 or 16 minutes. And that'll show you exactly how the kiting works so that you're aware of where you need to be generally during the phases and where you're kiting to, depending on which fixate cast it is for the phase. The basic idea, though, is you start near one cage here, and the first 2 kiters go to the opposite cage, toward the wall in the opposite cage. So when the first kite phase begins here, we'll go to the right, toward the other cage. First 2 fixates go along that wall, then the next 3rd fixate goes along the opposite wall, the other side. 4th fixate goes up the hall toward the entrance of the room, and then the final 5th fixate goes to the back of the room behind where the boss spawns. That's the basic idea. And this assumes you don't have a warlock with warlock portals. That makes it a lot easier. But this 5 fixate method worked really well for us. So again, if you want the details, go ahead and check out the full raid guide there in that section. We'll show you all about it. Now the first addition on Heroic that you'll have to face is the captive cave bats. And these spawn after you open the front left cage, which is usually the first one, so the green cage. And they'll spawn from the left of the room and kind of fly down toward your raid. They have normal threat and all that, so they should be picked up by your off tank at the time, and tanked in a position that allows your melee DPS to attack them. So no matter whether you're melee or range DPS, once the cave bats are in position and on your tank, you should do everything in your power to burn them down as fast as possible. So all your cleaves and your AE attacks, you really want to burn them as quick as you can. In addition, you can help out the healers by stunning the bats if you see them shoot out their vampiric bolt attack, basically. When that bolt goes off, stun them, and this will interrupt the bolt cast for a few seconds and prevent quite a bit of damage on the raid. It also stops healing on the bats for a bit, so it actually makes them die faster as well. Otherwise, just burn them down as quick as you can. You may even save minor DPS cooldowns for this purpose, and the faster the bats die, the more survival your raid will have for this phase. And this is the most dangerous phase throughout the fight, pretty much. So it's really important to handle that well. Beyond that, for survival on this phase, in particular, you're going to have random dots that will be applied to raid members. If you get a dot on you, especially if it's the kite portion of this phase and you're far away from the healers, use a personal survival cooldown. If you can dispel the dot off yourself, do that, but otherwise, just try to use a cooldown that allows you to survive a bit longer, because this is, as I said, the most dangerous phase in the fight, and if you're far away and you're kiting and you get that dot, you're probably going to die without some form of healing or cooldown. The second addition on Heroic, and the last one actually, is the Starved Yeti. And just like the bats, this Yeti will spawn after you open his appropriate cage, which is the second cage, or the front right blue one. He'll basically spawn in the middle of the room and start to run back and forth across the room every 10-15 seconds. This works just like the Yeti in the trash before the boss. And on this fight, if you get hit by him, he'll pretty much one-shot you as a DPS. So best thing you can do is to just watch his path. When he turns to rush toward an opposite portion of the room, look where he's going toward and make sure you're not in his path. And as long as he doesn't touch you, he can be ignored for the rest of the fight. Generally, you're going to need all your DPS to focus on the boss to meet the DPS requirement when you're learning this fight. So it's really important that you watch where he is and not let him touch you, but otherwise you ignore him. You don't really have to attack him. But other than that, it's pretty simple. You only have to look where he's running every, like I said, 15 seconds or so when he actually charges, and otherwise you don't have to really worry about him. Now, in order to maximize DPS on this boss, it's important that your kite phase allows DPS players to actually attack the boss as much as possible. So again, assuming your raid is using a kite pattern similar to what we're doing here, then the best method is, if you are melee DPS, to attack the boss as soon as the kite phase begins for about the first 3 fixates. So he's moving slow enough during the first 3 fixates that as a melee you should be able to keep up with him. As long as you stay behind him and watch where the next fixate is aiming towards, so watch where the red beam is aiming, and move yourself so you're not going to be in front of the boss when he turns that direction, then you can pretty much stay on him full time as a melee and attack him during those first 3 fixates. After about the 3rd fixate, however, when he starts to go up the hall to the entrance, he's going to be moving much too fast for you to keep up. So at that point, if the jailer is still alive, you'll want to switch to him and help finish him off. And otherwise, you can't really attack the boss as a melee. Range DPS, again, depending on how much melee you have and how much range you have, will generally start the kite phase attacking the boss a little bit, and then switch to the jailer when appropriate. You want to make sure the jailer dies just in time for the tank to pick up the key and get in position to open the cage when they need to, but not too much earlier. If you open it too early or kill the jailer too fast, that is, then you're just wasting potential DPS on the boss. So similar to melee, ranged can start kind of in the center here, which is pretty much a safe spot where the jailer is, and kind of attack the boss if they're not kiting the boss at the time, if they're not fixated. And then once you need to, as I said, switch to the jailer so he dies in time, but not too much earlier. It's also briefly worth noting, as I switch to some grainier footage, which I apologize for, was taken from a stream instead of my normal recording, but there is a bug that sometimes occurs that will mostly affect melee DPS. You can't do anything about it. And here, if you watch closely, the boss is going to turn just after the fixate ends, there he goes, and destroys everybody in melee. This usually will not occur, but 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 7 attempts, he'll just decide to do this randomly. And there's nothing you can do about it. We don't know why it occurs. We tried all sorts of methods to figure it out, but essentially, sometimes he just decides to turn for no reason, and in doing so, he'll kill melee DPS that are chasing him. But it's not worth not doing melee DPS to him in case this happens, so simply chalk that up to a bug and try another attempt, because you have to attack him during this phase, otherwise you're not going to have enough DPS overall. So I just thought I'd throw this clip in there to show you that it can happen, and it's no one's fault, it just sometimes he'll do it. And with that, I think I've covered everything for the Heroic DPS guide for Thok the Bloodthirsty. As I said, most of it comes down to knowing the kite patterns and positions, so again, you'll want to check out that animation if your raid uses the same method we do here, in the full raid guide in the bottom left there. And otherwise, make sure you are attacking the boss when appropriate during the kite phase and switching to the jailer when you need to. Make sure you're using personal survival cooldowns when appropriate during the normal phases, especially during the green normal phase if you get the dot, and even more especially during the green kite phase if you get the dot as well. Other than that, get in your appropriate positions so that you're not at risk of getting eaten by the boss if he fixates you. Make sure you're far enough away for the last couple fixates. And on the final fixate, if he's not on you, you can move into position at the markers and be ready to start DPSing as soon as he gets over there. So, as always, good luck. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe.